It's my pleasure to introduce our first keynote speakers. General George was commissioned as an infantry officer in 1988 from the United States Military Academy. In his over 35 years of service, he has held leadership positions at every echelon of the Army's maneuver force and in every formation type, to include commanding the 4th Infantry Division and the 1st Corps. He most recently served as the senior military advisor to the Secretary of Defense and has served as the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army since August of 2022. Sergeant Major of the Army Weimer enlisted in the Army in 1993 and successfully completed his Special Forces assessment and selection in 1994. He has served the bulk of his 30 years of service in special mission units with numerous operational and combat deployments around the world. Most recently, he served as the Command Sergeant Major of the U.S. Army Special Operations Command. He was sworn in as the 17th Sergeant Major of the Army in August of 2023. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my privilege to present the Acting Chief of Staff of the Army, General Randy George, and the 17th and current Sergeant Major of the Army, Sergeant Major of the Army, Michael Weimer.
Okay, well, good morning, everyone. Great to be here. I was remembering back, coming back, always love coming back to Fort Moore, and I was telling General Buzzard that I have to repeat that a whole bunch. I know you guys are down here. But a lot of us in here, I'm reminded we started our journeys here at Fort Moore, and just we were out there listening to the video, and we was like, hey, that's a recruiting video that we should be showing on TV. Those are the kinds of things that motivate me. And I think motivate all of us. So real honored to be here. I was going to ask a question, do they still call this the blue bedroom? No, some old timers remember this was the blue bedroom, the blue and the yellow bedroom, I guess now. It's changed a little bit. But Sergeant Major of the Army and I are real honored to be here. We got an hour. We're going to take every bit of it this morning. And we want to talk to you a little bit about where the Army's going. So first, I'll tell you a couple of things. We got together with, just last week, we put out 4 focus areas. We're going to talk about our 4 focus areas for the Army and do a little bit of detail. We're getting ready to write something, and we'll be putting that out to the force. What we wanted to do first was meet with all the 4-star commanders and sergeant majors. We just did that. Just this last week, had 2-hour back briefs with everybody at some of the things that we're looking on. So I will tell you a little bit about what we're thinking about, and then some of the other things that I think are going to require a little bit more time, and I'll give you an idea what those are. And then we plan to take about half the time, and then we'll take whatever questions everybody has. So first, it was kind of talked about up front with General Buzzard, but a lot of discussion in the building. I will tell you that for any of us who've been in the Army for a while, in the military for a while, I think the character of war has probably changed more in the last couple of years, and it's a more complex environment than certainly I have seen for 35 years. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Some of it is Ukraine lessons learned, but I will also tell you that there's a lot of things that are changing on commercial tech that I think are impacting that as well. So I'm going to go down a little bit of this ubiquitous sensing. I think we're seeing that. There's really nowhere you can hide anymore, whether it's space or cell phones. You look at OSINT. I get OSINT reports every day, and it's amazing the information that is out there and available. So it's difficult to hide. Everybody in here has seen the rapid advancement of unmanned systems, and I know General Rainey is going to talk a little bit about that. So not just unmanned aerial systems, but I think we're also seeing it on the ground and how that's going to change our force structure, manned-unmanned teamings, what we do, what we look like as we're maneuvering, making contact with machines before we make contact with humans, and what we can do to develop the situation. We've also seen that they're cheaper and longer range. And I know a month or so ago, 2 months, I read an article in the New York Times. There's somebody 3D printing UAS for $300 or $400, and they go 30 kilometers. So you just start thinking about what that's doing to change the character of war and how much that's changing down at the tactical level. I think we've seen the effectiveness of long-range fires over in Ukraine. I think long-range ground-based fires, very hard to target, very hard to kill, very lethal, open architecture so that we can rapidly adjust to the electromagnetic spectrum. Range is getting longer. That's having a real impact on the battlefield. So they're moving. I think we're seeing they're moving, they're striking, and they're moving again to protect themselves. I think we're seeing the importance and effectiveness of integrated air and missile defense. And I know that was something that we never thought about for the last 20 years. We spend a lot of time talking about it, I think at every level in the Army, and that will be of increasing importance. Same thing with commercial tech advancements and lessons from Ukraine on reducing our log footprint. 3D printing, what 3D printing is doing to what can you actually produce forward. We just was over and seeing what we're doing to support telemaintenance and how much that changes. You know, when we were traditionally bringing things all the way back to the rear, and now we are replacing barrels and breaches of large indirect fire systems all the way up front and just off the battle line. We're also seeing, I think through our own technical advance, electrical hybridization and what that means. And I think about our vehicles that you can have silent watch for 5 hours. You can have, your vehicles can be a lot faster and can move for up to 5 to 10 kilometers completely silently, and how that changes, what that will do to reduce the log footprint. And we're looking at that. And then the last thing, and there's certainly a whole bunch more, and we can talk about lessons learned, is what we're seeing on the commercial side with advances in technology with command and control. And we know our C2 nodes are going to have to be small, dispersed, low signature, and we know the technology exists to do that right now. And I'll give you one quick example, and we're going to talk about transformation, but we just were over, Sergeant Major of the Army and I were overseeing 2CR, and they went into the box for Sabre Junction with 6 strikers, 35 packs, all basically on tablets. They could separate and move those 6 strikers anywhere and stay connected and provide command and control for their teams. And that's exactly where we need to go, and we need to do that in a very simple manner. So we're going to have to change how we're organized. And I'm not going to go into detail on doing that here. That's one of the things that we have, and when I go down the focus areas, I've asked the 4-star commanders and sergeant majors to take a look at and review how are we structured and what needs to adjust based on the advances that we're seeing. We are going to have to change how we train. And with multi-domain effects that are happening right now, what do we do at home station? What do we do at CTCs? I'm going to talk a little bit about warfighters. So I've tasked the FORCECOM commander specifically and the TRADOC commander to work with him to decide how we're going to adjust our combat training centers, where we train and how we train, because I think that that's something we're going to have to adjust going forward. And then we're going to have to change how we acquire things. And it's going to have to be, we're going to have to do things much more rapidly than we have done them in the past. And that is, a lot of that work is going to be for us up in the building to figure that out. But I'll give you one quick example on unmanned systems that you take the couple of systems that we have right now, let's say it's the Raven that costs $50,000, $60,000, but we need to be able to treat UAS like a keyboard or a mouse, and you need to be able to go buy that stuff and have it available and use it. Every formation, I see every formation that we have, not just infantry and armor formations, but every formation is going to have to use unmanned systems for reconnaissance, for targeting, you name it, but every every formation is going to have to do that, and we're going to have to figure out how to do that. So on that part, there is a reemergence, I think, of tactical innovation. And if all of you are students of our profession, but most of the great ideas always came from the bottom up. Most of them come from the bottom up, and so what we have to do is capture those. So I ask you to think about that. I'm going to talk to you at the end about why you're here at Great Fort Moore and in this environment that you're in, to think about that, to write about it, to pass that up, and to make sure that we're seeing that. And that's our responsibility, is to make sure we have good feedback mechanisms and we're collecting that. I see General Beagle down there. I know he's doing that to reinvigorate that feedback loop to make sure that we're getting it. What we can't do, we can't afford to do what everybody wants to innovate everywhere, so we have to figure out how we can connect all of that together. Okay, so I'm going to cover quickly. Sergeant Major and I are going to go down each of the warfighting or each of the focus areas. And the number one thing that we do, and we went all the way back to the history of our Army, way back to 1775. It starts with our motto, "This will defend." And our Army exists to fight and win our nation's wars. That's why we exist. That's why we're in this uniform. And our number one focus area has to be warfighting. And we are going to be laser focused on that. I talked about the lessons from Ukraine, and we're going to have to build those into our professional military education. We're also going to have to make sure that we're passing those and building those into the unit training that we're doing. So for this first warfighting focus, you're going to have General Pappas is going to talk to you, so you can talk to him in a little bit more detail about this. So that will be led by FORSCOM, also by General Flynn, who's out in USERPAC, and then finally by General Williams. And what I'd like to tell everybody, according to the National Defense Strategy, we are focused in the Pacific, but we have the acute threat in Europe. We are a global army, and it's really tough. If you look back in history to predict where we're going, we got to be ready to go anywhere on short notice. So a couple quick things before I turn over to Sergeant Major. I get asked a lot about what kind of training that we're doing or extra stuff that gets put on. 350-1 training is the one that I get asked about. And so what I've told all the commanders and what I'm telling all of you is that I expect you to focus on what makes you more lethal and cohesive. And that's if there are things that are on your training schedule that are not making you more lethal or a more cohesive team where you're taking care of your teammates, then you need to have a discussion about taking that off the schedule and not doing it. So this has to be a dialogue. And I know when I did QTBs as a division commander and a corps commander, the discussion that I always had with everybody was, tell me what it is that you should not be doing. Because the hard thing to do is to make choices, all right, and decide what you're not going to do. So again, if it doesn't contribute to train, fit, discipline, and cohesive, lethal teams, then we shouldn't be doing it. Second is, we've given a task out. One of the things that I think we absolutely have to be good at is fighting at every echelon. So there's been a discussion over the last 20 years where everybody would say, hey, we're brigade-centric. There's been discussion about division-centric. And I will tell you is that we fight at echelon. That's what the Army does. We're going to have to fight in the Pacific. We may have battalions out there fighting with theater-level enablers. We're going to have 3-star JTFs. We are going to have to fight at every echelon, and we're going to have to figure out how to do that at every echelon. So that's where we're going to adjust our training. That's what I'm talking about at CTCs. But our joint force relies on the Army C2 to do that, and we're going to be capable of doing it at every level. To do that, I think we need to have much better lower overhead brigade and higher collective training. So who in here has been part of a division warfighter? Raise your hand, you've been part of a division warfighter. All right, so what I know is common for everybody who's raising their hand is that typically if you're going to train a division, it means you got a whole bunch of people that are down below you that are assembling to be pucksters, support personnel, and all of those things. And I think about the video game culture that we have right now and see no reason why we cannot produce, and we will, a collective trainer so that battalion and higher can get reps and sets on what they need to do to target and to train without requiring all the pain that we have in the downstream formations. All right, so that is going to be a focus area and a quick turn for our team to do that. I also think we're going to look at re-examining rearm. So I'm looking forward to feedback from division and corps commanders on rearm. I think it's something that we need to review. You have to have a model for how you're going to form your units, train, rest and refit and modernize, but we need to review those timelines. I see the G3 that's out there. We've had a lot of conversations on this, but we're going to have to take a look at how we're doing that going forward. I hear a lot of frustration about long lead time parts, and I'll talk about this in the next bucket, but just like what we've seen with the industrial base, I think we have to have, you build strength inside your formation and making sure you have magazine depth, and part of magazine depth is parts and making sure that you have the ability to do that. So we're focused on that, and that's a big task for AMC. And then the last thing I'll throw out before I throw it over to the Sergeant Major of the Army is the biggest complaint that I always had growing up was not how busy I was, it was predictability. Nothing frustrates families more, nothing frustrates, I think, any of us more than finding out something at the last minute. And so I've heard a lot of comments through the years that company commanders and first sergeants aren't as good at training management, or battalion commanders aren't as good. And I will tell you that the responsibility rests at every level, all the way up. We know we're going to have to respond to some unforeseen circumstances, and I've been up in the Joint Staff doing the Secretary of Defense orders book and the gift map, and I know that we're going to do that. But a lot of times, these are self-inflicted problems because we don't have good training and maintenance management. And so we are going to be focused on that. When we come around, we're going to be talking about that and looking at that. And it's very easy for me when I was a division or corps commander to go to a company headquarters, look at a training schedule, go up and look at the battalion, and go up and look at the brigade and see where the challenges were. And so we all need to be focused on making sure we're getting better in those areas. Okay, I'll turn it over to the Sergeant Major of the Army.
Thank you, sir. Is this on? How about now? All right, we're moving on. Can you hear me in the back? Cool. All right. So, hey, the non-commissioned officer. Well, first off, I see some of our international partners in here. So that's powerful. So really, really good to have you. Incredibly diverse group right now. I'll tell you, the non-commissioned officer is absolutely the competitive edge. And I believe that in my heart of hearts is why I'm still serving, and I'm standing here with General George today. But we've got some work to do. And the reason I articulate it that way is how General George set the stage, the character of war, where we are with tech. We've got to jump right into the second topic there, because these are not separated. They cross over. They're nested together. We've got to transform how we develop our non-commissioned officers, and we have to transform how we train. We have to transform how we manage our time. And I do believe at every echelon, the non-commissioned officer has a key role to play in every one of those things. If we're not training hard and we don't have the predictability that General George is talking about, then I don't think we're as lethal as we say we are. I know that's a bold statement, but it's real. And I know we have the potential, and I know we have the talent. I'm looking at a room. I mean, I want to sign up for another 30 years, sir. I want to be more. I've bought in all day long. But I really believe that warfighting is the reason we exist. Warfighting is what needs to motivate us when we get up in the morning. You can't be a good warfighter if you don't take care of your family. You can't be a good warfighter if you don't take care of your teammates. You can't be the premier warfighter if you aren't managing your time. The list goes on and on and on. So they're not inseparable. And I think that's why you're going to hear us start with and focus on warfighting. The non-commissioned officer is key to that. And last time I checked, I was responsible for training every day. And I think we need to take that ownership, put that rock back in our rucksacks, and transform how we train and reach the lethality that General George is talking about that I know we need for the fight we have now and the fight that's coming. Sir?
Major. Okay, the next one I'll go through here pretty quickly, but it's delivering ready combat formations. And one of the things that SMA talked about is, people at the centerpiece of all of these, and especially this one, if you're going to have a ready combat formation, is making sure that your soldiers and your families are ready. And that's a big part of it. So one of the things we've been running for the last couple months, SMA and I, and we're doing one again here with the Secretary of the Army, is what we call Building Cohesive Teams Update. So I see General Bernabe it's in the audience, and other commanders, every installation that I've been to is different. Every one of them. Alaska is different than Irwin, is different than JBLM or Liberty or Fort Moore. And everybody requires slightly different resources and assets. And we are really focused on empowering the commanders and sergeant majors at each one of these installations to make sure that they get the resources that they need to make sure that they're taking care of their formations. So we can't be looking at bubble charts, red, amber, and green from the Pentagon and telling you what's most effective at your particular installation. And so we want to reverse that around. Second is we are going to continue to do this, and there's probably not a lot of folks that are in here, but incredibly important to you is improving our industrial base. And I could talk to you for a long time about that, but everybody knows, and that's what I was talking about with magazine depth, that we have to have magazine depth. Wars are never as quick as we want them, and we have to be prepared for that. And we are rapidly doing everything we can to make sure that we're improving our industrial base. The next gets to this intersection with commercial tech, and that's what I call predictive maintenance. That I think one of the things that we had just put out here, so if the X-Word's not on the street, it will be out there soon, is it's been my complaint for a long time that we service our vehicles too much, especially our wheeled fleet. That we spend a whole bunch of time, we've driven it like 400 miles, and it's the 1 year comes up, and we got to take that thing all the way down to the screws and build it back up again, and that takes a lot of time. So I think we're getting ready to put something out on maintenance here, and this was all the CW5 senior maintenance techs who really know what the hell they're talking about. That got together on this, and we're going to reduce the service interval for some of our vehicles. And just First Corps alone, they calculated it, and I think this was Chief Lakes, this will save 35 man-years alone, just in First Corps. To do something like that, common sense, but figuring out how we're doing that. We're also looking at how we can use predictive maintenance to make sure that we're also, when we're actually operating these vehicles, like John Deere. I grew up in a farming community. They basically have predictive maintenance right now that tells you when you need to service your vehicle. And I think we can move towards that. The next thing is, and General Pappas will be here, and we talked about it this weekend, we have too much excess. We had a troop commander tell me about his 118 pages on his property book. I know we have too much, all right? We have, and we're not going to take a lot of that stuff when we roll out to combat. So we're going to review that. We're actually going to put a 2-star in charge of that effort. And we are going to focus, I think we're going to start at Liberty. So I see General Donahue that's out there. We're going to pick a couple, and we're going to make substantial change in the next 90 days on getting rid of all the excess that is inside of our formations right now. And if you got company commander that takes 3 weeks, 4 weeks just to inventory his property, That's a lot of time that they should be on the range and doing other things to build their warfighting skills, and so we're going to get after that. The other thing we're looking at related to that, I'm always amazed that I could go into Walmart, usually to buy like black electrical tape, and I'll leave with the $200 in my bag. But I also know that they can go and inventory everything in that Walmart overnight. And so we got to figure out how we can do passive inventory systems to make sure that we can even reduce that time even more, so we're looking at that. And then the last thing I'll go on this is that we have a lot of programs in the Army. And there's some folks down here that I know that I served together with when I was a division commander. We have a lot of things that are available to soldiers and families, and we should. Our problem is that we don't have good tech to let everybody know how they can find that stuff. And I'm talking apps and websites. And so you'll hear us talking about this again at AUSA. We're going to give everybody like 45 days to get our shit together and make sure that we have a good app, something that where families are moving from one area to the next, and they actually know what's available there. You know when the gym is open, you know when the gym's closed, you know what gate is open, when the gate's going to close. Real simple stuff that I think we can do really quickly. Sergeant Major.
Yeah, and to the Vice's comment earlier, really allow the installation, the ability to set that app up for how it's applicable for them. You know, Hohenfeld's is different than Alaska. It's different than Moore. It's different than Irwin. So one size does not fit all. Back to the Vice's comment about empowering those command teams at those locations. But there is a lot we can do here when we look at the time that is being spent by our soldiers and the leadership that is taking away from warfighting tasks. Now, I'm not saying, it can be, people misinterpret that based off of how long you've been in the Army. I'm not saying maintenance is not a warfighting task. Making sure the fleet is ready to roll is a warfighting task. But what I am saying is how often we're doing it and when we're doing it, and is it too much? What we're hearing is yes, 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 and it's distracting. We've yet to figure out how to add any more time to the calendar. That's one thing Outlook hasn't solved for us, and so I think these things are key to what we're talking about. The last thing I'll add, so we can move on and stay on time. We've got to make sure that as we're transforming and as we're becoming more advanced with all this great tech, and I'm a tech guy, I have a reputation of being the guy that likes the new stuff and wants to break it and give it back and break it again. We have to be sure we are brilliant at the basics. Tech is not going to be the substitute for being brilliant at the basics. If we compromise on that, all the complexity that General George is talking about and the advanced technology, it's just going to exacerbate not being brilliant at the basics. And I think that's a key thing for everybody to remember.
Okay, thanks, Sergeant Major. All right, I'm going to try to go quickly again. So on the continuous transformation, I mentioned earlier the 3CR or the 2CR example. So here's just an example of a tablet that's in a hard case. And there's no reason that a battalion commander, his 3, his FSO, his intel, they can't all be looking at the same thing and then be dispersed in other vehicles that are tied together and have access to common operating picture, common intel picture, and joint fires on this right here and be able to talk to each other. And that's where we got to move, and this is what I was talking about with 2CR. And it's one cheaper, easier, lower signature, more effective, and that's one of the things we need to move. So you'll see some of that. Some of your units will be involved with this. General Rainey's going to get up and talk about it. We have an effort right now called Fix and then Pivot, and we're looking at what we need to do to fix our network. Having been in having a C2 cell where I had 19 Pelican cases worth of stuff that I had to break down and 15 vehicles pulling up, we can't operate like that on the battlefield. And so we're going to have to figure out how to reduce that. The other thing, back to continuous transformation, and we talk about transformation because it's Not modernization means equipment. I think transformation means how we train with it, how we operate. It's a little bit more than just equipment-centric. There's a lot of great examples of what we're doing with that with counter UAS, and General Gainey has been leading the effort for the Army, really for the Joint Force, where we have open architecture. We may not change the big equipment, but we're changing the missile, we're changing the software, and we are becoming more lethal on the battlefield because we're doing that. Okay, and then I know General Rainey's going to be up here. He's going to talk to you about robotics, hybridization. And the real thing I'll leave you with, I think, on the continuous transformation is everybody looks for these big leaps. I think that there's a lot of things that are happening right now inside commercial tech that we need to take the small steps and continually change. And I will tell you that if you change the C2, having gone just out to NTC and take a look at what it looks like for a C2 node, that will be a huge change for our Army. But I think what we need to do is, this back to my innovation and bottom up, is be ready to constantly iterate and change our formations as much as we can over the next couple of years. Small change will equal big steps. Okay. All right, the last is I'm going to cover is strengthening the profession of arms. And I always tell the story, remember coming from here when I was a company commander, getting infantry, armor, magazine, field artillery journal, and looking at those things and getting great feedback from my peers. And that is something that we are invigorating, that you should also have that accessible on your handheld device rather than getting a PDF. So you should go in there, you should be able to search the site. So that just kicked off with General Brito. It's called the Harding Project. I don't know if Major Zach Griffiths in here, but it's going to be led by TRADOC with Major Griffiths, Captain, Lieutenant, NCO. There it is right there. So I encourage all of you, I mean, this is how, like I said, the bottom-up innovation is going to happen. Share your lessons. This is where we need to have to strengthen our profession. The other things that we're looking at is how do we change our PME to make sure we're building resiliency. We can talk about recruiting in the Q&A, but our environment is different. Soldiers coming into the formation today are different than they were. How do we adjust our PME to make sure that we are building the warfighting culture, building resiliency, making sure people are prepared? I didn't have to worry about having a cell phone when I was a brand new private when I first come in, or when I was a lieutenant. I wasn't calculating how much I was spending on Hulu and YouTube and all the other stuff which can sneak up on you. That's part of our reality today that I think that we need to be able to think about and talk to people about and train them. And then the last thing is, hear a lot of comments about standards and discipline. A whole bunch of comments about that. And I think everybody in here knows that disciplined units are the units that are successful in combat. It's the absolute requirement for a unit in combat. And we've got some challenges, I think, with discipline and standards. And I've heard it from every 4-star commander and sergeant major all the way down. Just out in Europe talking to units. And so I think everybody has a responsibility to get after that at every level, and we are focused on doing that. Sergeant Major.
Yeah, absolutely, and then we'll jump right into questions, sir. Standards and discipline and being brilliant at the basics. If there's a pyramid because we love pyramids, that's at the bottom of it. That is absolutely at the bottom. If we compromise in either of those, and I love what we're doing on the innovation side, don't get me wrong, but that's not going to make up for either of those two. It's just not. And we're putting land nav back into our training, so I can say this. We got to actually step away from the tank and orient our map and calibrate our compass. Land nav analogies are back. So, I mean, this is absolutely critical. And then I'm excited about this because this is part of what it means to be a professional of your skill. We read, we write, we discuss. And some of that, to General George's point, will be in more advanced platforms like podcasts and things of that nature. But I am shocked when I go around and talk to units and I ask people, hey, did you listen to this? Hey, did you read this? And the answer is no. What are you listening to? And insert your Vogue podcast of the day that is not focused on what it means to be a warfighter. And we got to get some of that back. As a very senior group of folks towards the center of the room, but it probably gets a little younger as we move back and up. It's important we regain this. I believe it, sir.
Gentlemen, thank you for those remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll now transition to the question and answer portion. As a reminder, if you have a question, you can move to one of the microphones in the center aisle, or you can use the QR code that we'll have displayed here in a second and send it in over the app. Gentlemen, as we're waiting for the first questions to come in, if it's okay, I'll ask the first one. And this question pertains to recruiting and accessions. Gentlemen, it's well known that the Army is facing a recruiting challenge. What do you see as some of the impacts to the force, and what is the way ahead to address this challenge?
Okay. Yeah, we got 25 minutes left. I could probably talk about recruiting for the next 25 minutes. It's a big challenge for us. And I just was listening to Peter Zan. I don't know if anybody's listened. Really good book. The End of the World is Just Beginning is something very provocative writer. But what is very truthful is demographics are going down. So I don't know if you guys have seen, we have 91 colleges closed, across our country. So, there's just less available to get there. We're having struggles with people meeting our standards, passing the ASVAB, height, weight, and those kinds of things. So I think everybody in here I know the leaders are familiar with what we're doing with Future Soldier Prep Course. We're doing some other things. TRADOC has been innovating a lot in this area to figure out how we can help make people meet our standards. And I think that's, what we need to do. We're looking at how we market and how we get the word out on what's going on. We have been meeting, the Sergeant Major of the Army and I and the Secretary with a pretty small group here. We've had some people take a look at it to include industry. We're getting ready to announce here in a couple weeks, I think, some fairly big changes on how we're going to go about this a little bit, how we're going to use tech a little bit differently, like all the tech that's out there to recruit, Indeed, Yellow, whatever, you name it, all those things to make us more accessible, how we professionalize our recruiting force, so that we're doing that, and maybe we'll be less disruptive to what we have inside of our formation. So we're looking at that very broadly, closing in on that. We should be announcing something here in the next couple weeks. What I would ask all of you to do is, everybody out here knows somebody back in a hometown, and I'm interested in your feedback, but all of you going back home and us providing the time to make sure that we're doing that and talking to people, and they see you in your uniform and what you're doing, and you tell them. I think there's nothing better than a personal story. I enlisted in the Army because of a personal story of a veteran. Made a difference. He said, hey, go, it's a good opportunity for you to go make yourself better, and then you can figure out what you want to do with your life. So I would ask everybody to tell their own story. Sergeant Major.
Yeah, we're transforming our recruiting model. Right? I think it's important for those in the room that aren't in this conversation every day to know this has been a 20-year journey to get where we are today. This did not happen overnight. It's going to take a little time to correct it, but we're transforming and bringing our accessions model into what we are saying is going to be a sustainable model that can survive contact with things that are happening domestically, internationally, with the economy, et cetera. We have to do that. We have to figure that out. That's part of ensuring we're as ready as we need to be, and that's what we're doing. The only thing I would add to that is I would tell you, do not assume that America knows the Army that we know. We've closed our bases off, and we've really segregated ourselves post 9/11. You know, it's kind of fitting as of what yesterday was, the anniversary yesterday. For those of us that were in the Army before 9/11, we remember our installations were wide open. And we were very nested in the community, or at least more nested, depending on where you were. And we've got to get some of that back, and we got to tell our story. And lastly, we have got to get back in the information environment with the great things that our Army does. Because right now, the negative is owning the information space, and that's unfair to the amazing people we have in the Army.
Great. Gentlemen, thank you. And again, just as a reminder, if you have questions in the audience, you can move to the microphone or send in questions, and we're getting a bunch coming in over the app. Sergeant Major, this next question was directed to you, came in over the app, and it pertains to MCoES and your comments about strengthening the profession. What's your assessment of our current MCoES, and what adjustments or improvement do we need to implement, if any?
So I'll cut to the chase on this one. I think our NCOES, our PME model, needs to transform just like everything else we're talking about. We're coming out of post 9/11, and it's time. And we need to clearly define, and I know the Command Sergeant Majors, all of us, we've been talking about this in depth. We need to clearly define what is a unit's responsibility to train, and what is TRADOC's responsibility to train, and then what should TRADOC be validating? Because we absolutely need validation. There's a reason why you are going to go do an ACFT when you show up, right? Because past performance is the best indicator of future performance. We need to validate and make sure that units are doing what we know they should be doing. I'll use land nav again. Why are we, I'll state the question and then answer it. Why are we putting land nav back into PME? Twofold. One, because we're not doing it at units. And two, we're trying to bring some rigor back to our PME training. Well, that tells me those are two things that may not be happening as much as they used to be happening when I think back to what the 90s was, when I was in the Army, when I basically lived with poison ivy all over me and, you know, chiggers and you name it. I had it because I lived in the woods with a rucksack on. We had plenty of rigor in the 90s. I'm looking at some folks that were there with me in the 90s. We're bringing some of that back. But with accessions and where we are with training management, we've got to ensure that if we're taking Staff Sergeant Weimer, Specialist Weimer out of your formations, it's only to go to TRADOC for PME for something that I can't get at the unit, or it's going to be edifying at TRADOC. Because that's the same squad leader that we need at the unit for all the warfighting stuff we've already talked about. So we've got to transform that and dial that in. I think we're headed in a great direction. I'm not losing sleep over this, but it'll be a bit of a journey to get those two things right.
Thank you. This next question I'm going to pull off of the app as well. It looks like it's coming from an MCCC student. So in MCCC, we're spending a lot of time studying close combat and LISCO against a peer adversary. Some see this as a back to the future and a return to the Army of the 90s. What's your view on how the changing character of warfare will impact close combat and make it different from what the Army trained in the 90s? And I think pulling the thread on Ukraine lessons learned there a little, sir. Thanks.
Yeah, I think there's some similarities, and I think there's a lot of differences as well. We talked a little bit about them, but it's what I tell everybody, that the Army is the close combat, capability for the joint force, and we know we're going to need the Army to do almost anything that's out there because of that capability. So we're going to end up having to seize land. We're going to have to, seize key infrastructure. You name it, I could go down the list of the things that the Army will be tasked to do. I think it's going to require close combat forces. How they're organized, I think could be a little bit different. How we're using unmanned systems to assist with doing that. What is the ratio of vehicles? And I'm interested in all of them looking at that based on the lessons, and that's kind of what we were talking about is we're going to get that kind of thought and innovation that's coming up. But I think that anybody who thinks that close combat is going to go away and that war is going to be quick and there's going to be a couple of strikes and it's going to be over, I think is misinformed and really hasn't been following what's happened historically, because I think that that's always going to be a requirement.
Thank you, sir. And it looks like we have a question out at microphone number 1. Please go ahead.
Hey, Sergeant Sergeant Major, Command Sergeant Major retired Chris Greca. In 2013, we had the Year of the Army Professional when I was assigned to CAC under General Dave Perkins. And it was an initiative that was driven from the Army really to make people understand the character, competence, and commitment that we're expecting of our young soldiers in shaping the force. I've had a lot of discussion with sergeant majors, senior leaders today about what a lot of people perceive as a capability gap in young NCOs and in training at the individual and the small unit level. We're talking about those sergeants and those staff sergeants out there. Just as an idea, having a year of the NCOs as trainers, Sergeant Major as an example, where we really get back to teaching in the operational force to those young sergeants and staff sergeants and sergeants first class what unit training management truly looks like. How to do a crosswalk from formerly those metal tasks now to the CATs, all the way down to those critical individual tasks, so those leaders know exactly what they should be training and why. And finally, as a young sergeant and staff sergeant in 2nd Ranger Battalion, I was required to have 2 opportunity and hip pocket training tasks every single week that we planned and we resourced. Now, we only executed if we had the time available, should it pop up. But an initiative like that across the Army where we make sergeants and staff sergeants think about the training that they're executing at the individual level or the small unit and why, I think would be extremely powerful. Thank you.
It's good to see you. I think it was more of a statement than a question there. And I don't think any of us would disagree with you. What we talk about, though, is the issue is there's a gap. The same soldier that you're talking about, the same staff sergeant right now that doesn't have a CIB or doesn't have a patch on their right shoulder, the company and battalion level sergeant majors that we talk about, they know GWAT. They really do. And so the training management that you're referencing that was standard for us in the 90s, idle time was not something we had a lot of in the company area in the 90s. I'll just leave it alone with that. We were busy. And we got to get back to that. And that's where I do think that TRADOC is going to be able to help us identify and close that gap to where we get some of that institutional knowledge back for the NCO, so that every company and battalion area is busy training on war fighting. I don't disagree with you, and that's where we're headed.
I want to make one more comment on that, Sergeant Major, so I appreciate the comments. I also think this is my point on training management, that it really takes, it's every level to make sure that sergeant majors and first sergeants and all of our NCO leadership have the time to do those things that they want to do. Hip pocket training is different, big fan of that. Remember, and I agree with you 100%, but one of the examples that was given when we were, I think, over talking to 2CR was, with the challenges that we had with COVID, and generally we had a cohort that had been doing inside, that no one wants to relive the COVID couple of years that we had. But the requirement to do a team leaders course, for example, they said, hey, we needed to re-green everybody on those things. You have to provide the time to do that. You have to build that in your training schedule, and then you have to figure out how you're going to sustain that when you get new folks that are in. That requires discussion really at every level to say you're going to have, you're going to build these foundational pieces. And we can't go, I always talk about training management it's one thing to build our warfighting skills, but also, hey, I like my family, I like to go home too. Weekends and all those other things is why it's critically important. So again, if there's for leaders in here, understanding, training, and maintenance management, one of the comments that you brought up, Sergeant Major, was metal crosswalk. Why are you doing certain tasks? I think we've got some work to do in those areas to really understand that and make sure it's straight throughout our formation.
And something else you've been talking about, sir, that I think is key to the super diverse audience in here, and that's sometimes we have to say no to good ideas. There's only so much time on that calendar, period. And so if you haven't sat back and identified the fundamentals that are no fail, the term I grew up with, this is no fail, no compromise, we will conduct these training events, that's probably where I would start. And then you find out quickly, well, Corps telling me to do this, and Division's telling me to do this, and the Army sent this down, and this requirement, and then next thing you know, you can truly articulate the risk back up to where how much time you have to conduct the training you're talking about. And I think that's real. When we need to acknowledge that. Have to identify the no-fail fundamentals. And if you're struggling to meet those training requirements, you need to key the mic and come up to your chain of command.
Gentlemen, thank you. We'll go back to microphone number 1.
Hey, good morning, sir. Sergeant Major. First of all, appreciate the time. Colonel David Berger, Army National Guard G3. I'm at a little advantage here because I sit on General Jensen's staff and I get to hear you speak every week. I would really appreciate it if you can address the Compo 2 folks and the Compo 3 folks that are in the audience. We're talking about buying back time. Certainly Compo 2 and 3 soldiers understand time management in regards to balancing both. But you're a champion for Compo 2, and I always appreciate some of the comments that you make talking about the Army as a whole and really focusing on some Compo 2 issues. I would appreciate it if you could just foot some of those talking points that you periodically do for the Compo 2 folks in the room. Thank you very much.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for the question. So I think what the last 20 years has proven, and I think anything in the future will just prove that even more, is that it's a total Army that's going to be required when we're going to deploy, fight, and then win. And the National Guard has unique problems, as you know, Compo 2 and Compo 3. I don't think anything that we've talked about doesn't apply. It basically gets to the time cycle and how we're doing that. So I know one of the things that we're talking about is getting together. I've talked to General Hokanson and General Jensen about how are we funding readiness inside the Guard to make sure that we're building, the right readiness and that we have it at the right locations. We are going to look at force structure because I think we need to in the active Army, and we will make adjustments. That is much more difficult, I think, on the Guard and the Reserve side, just of how we do that. And so that you will be a part of that conversation as we move forward to figure out how we're doing that. And then the last thing I would say for any, and I don't know how many folks we have out here with the Guard, but we have, our Guard has been, I think, over the last 20 years, I would say really over the last 2 or 3 years, with what we're doing on the border, what you guys are doing to respond to natural disasters and crises really around the world, is that we could not do it without strength that we have right now in Compo 2 and the commitment. So I'm also interested, like I said up front, if there's feedback when we go out and talk to everybody from you specifically on how we can help zero in from that, we'd love to hear it.
Sir, thank you. Sir, the next question has to do with readiness, and there's a bunch of questions coming in on the app that deal with this topic. I think to kind of give a synopsis, what do you see as some of the challenges with sustaining readiness? And then if you could also link that back to the comments you made with regard to rearm and that model. Do you see that model is working? Do you anticipate that it may change going forward? And is it having the desired impact that we wanted? Thank you.
Yeah, like I said up front, I think you have to have a model. You have to train And then, you have that readiness, you're probably going to deploy, or you're in a PTDO status or something, and then you're going to need to refit, and you're going to need to modernize. So I think the model, you have to have a model. And what we need to do is review, does it work? Is it working across all of our formations? And I will tell you that one of the challenges that I've heard and actually experienced a little bit is I think it's a little bit more of a problem, for example, for our ABCTs. It's a really tough, short cycle. So I think we know we're going to need a model, and the task was to review, let's take a look at it. There are other things that maybe, there are bold things that I think that we could do to take people off. Do we look at a whole division or something? And obviously, FORCECOM is looking at this because their big challenge is we're still responding to what's going. We still have 140,000 troops that are deployed around the world, so we have to balance whatever we need for readiness. So that's our challenge. But back to the recruiting, that's why we talk about recruiting all the time. And we've done better this year. I think we'll see about a 20% increase over last year, still well below where we need to be. But that's about having the right soldiers inside of our formation. That has a readiness impact, obviously.
Yeah, just to add one on that, the Vice went right where I was going to finish up. As we get our sessions healthy again, we'd love to work on stability. We talk about cohesive teams and how much we put into building cohesive teams, but then think of the turnover at the units. And so, again, we've got to get healthy. We have requirements, whether you're in 2ID on Penn or you're 2CR over in Europe and everything in between, we need people. And so it causes that turnover, and we all know that disrupts cohesiveness. So, again, you can't, everything we're talking about, sessions affects it all.
Sir, another question from the app, and this one has to do with the Ukraine. Sir, do you see any impact to our support to the Ukraine on our readiness and the capacity of our industrial base?
So what I have seen from this, we've been getting supplementals back. It's been very important. So everything that we've provided, we have gotten money back. That's something that we watch really, really closely. One of the things that I think it has made everybody realize is that we need a strong industrial base. And I'll give you one example on the 155 rounds, where we were normally producing 155 rounds, enough for training. And it was, I don't know anybody in here who's been to a depot, but if you go to a depot, they largely, the ones that I've been to, didn't look that different than probably they looked in the 40s and 50s. And we're automating those now, and 155 is the perfect example. We were producing about 14,000 rounds a year ago. We're producing more than double that now, and we'll go up to being able to produce 1 million rounds a year. So you can look at with the production increase. And what we want to do is automate what we're doing for production so that we can expand or contract based on how we want to do it. It's hard with the old depots to add more people. It's hard in a small area. I went to the Iowa ammunition plant. It's hard to hire a whole bunch of extra people and start building that up. So I think that those are the things that we're going to have to look at to make sure that we're doing. So I don't know, I got a little bit carried away on industrial base. I don't know if I covered the initial spot of that.
Sure, the initial one was just about our own readiness, but...
Yeah, we're not as short that I'm tracking. I ask this question all the time on, we should be shooting some more. And so I'm not tracking that there's been, to me, that's CCIR to make sure that we have the ability to train our formations.
Thank you, sir. Sure, gentlemen, we have time for one more question, and this one's getting a lot of play in the app, and it's referenced the ACFT, and I'll just kind of put it together here. The proposed 2024 NDAA has put the ACFT back in the news. What do you anticipate is the future of the ACFT?
We're going to continue doing the ACFT. The ACFT. The ACFT is really helping us change the culture of fitness in the United States Army. And H2F is just another extension of that. We focus a lot on the ACFT itself, which will continue to evolve. And I know General George will add on a little bit here, but that has really been a critical tool for us in the entire holistic health and fitness arena to change the culture of fitness. What it means, and this is direct to warfighting. This is directly fits into warfighting, period. And so I look forward to taking a whole bunch of ACFTs.
Yeah, what we're hoping to do is actually study this even more to make sure, you know, we got the standards right. And I always go back to the example of, and there's several of us who remember the APFT adjusted, it changed over time. And so I think the standards are going to adjust and change, and we're going to study that on the ACFT. The other thing that I will tell everybody is that there's a big commitment. We are going to, we're working through our budget process right now, but want to double the amount of money that we're spending on H2F so that we can get those quickly into every unit, because I think they make a big difference. And I love your H2F gym this morning there, General Buzzard, really nice. So.
Again, this goes to the culture of continuous transformation. We should be continually transforming in our actual fitness and our culture of fitness too. So it's not one and done. We've got to lose that mindset.
Well, gentlemen, we're at time for this keynote session. Thank you so much for joining us for the Maneuver Conference and for your remarks today. And thanks for being with us.